I'm Kathryn Jean Lopez from the National Review Institute, and I'm really delighted to be able to welcome Kimberly Henkel from Springs of Love and Lisa Wheeler from Carmel Communications, founder of Carmel, both founders. And in a few moments, we'll have Rebekah Weigel, who's writer and producer of the upcoming movie Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot, which I'm really excited. Oh, here's Rebekah. Hi. I was just introducing you, the writer and producer of this movie, The Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot. And it's so good to see you again because I saw you on set some time ago, and I'm really amazed at how much publicity this movie is getting, and so grateful. Let's start with you, Rebekah. We just started introductions, and you must be overwhelmed. There was a premiere in California last week, and lots of things going on.
Yes, Lisa and her team are keeping us busy, and we're so excited about all the publicity and just the response we're getting. So we do have another premiere coming up in Atlanta this week. So it is really busy, but we're thrilled at the response we're getting from early screenings. So
Well, and we should tell anyone who doesn't know, Possum Trot is a small town in Texas, and this beautiful Baptist church, a small Baptist church, made it their mission to make sure there were no children in the foster care system in their surrounding area. And it's something like 22 families and 77 kids were taken in, I believe.
yeah, and I think one of the most profound things is they took in the ones that no one else would take. They said, send us the hardest to place kids. And it's just such a testimony of what can happen. Like, think of all the churches across America took that seriously to care for all the children right in their own communities. I mean, we could clear out the foster system with no problem.
Right. And one thing I often say to people, and I should mention, like this movie comes out of your work in child welfare. You've had a heart for kids who are vulnerable for a long time. I should also note that all of my guests here, Kimberly, Lisa, and Rebekah, are all adoptive moms. And so they know the reality of it. And I imagine that your experience informed the honesty with which you present the Trot story. You know, there were some people in the congregation who weren't so happy that Bishop Martin and his wife were encouraging this because, it's really hard. And it
Mhm.
is really hard. And you show that too in the movie. God bless those child actors. You didn't do anything too much. But you still showed the reality of how hard it is.
Yeah, that was really important to us. I think just as foster adoptive parents, and just that we didn't sugarcoat it, that we didn't, bring people into something, saying this is easy and it's going to be so perfect. And, I mean, we wanted to draw people into the reality of the situation where you're dealing with the foster care issue, you're dealing with brokenness, you're dealing with pain, you're dealing with, trauma. And it's not easy stuff, but it's, what we're equipped and called to do as the church is to take on the hard stuff.
And there was a scene early on in the movie when Pastor Martin and his wife are with a boy they brought into their home, and it was so beautiful how they immediately say, call me mama, call me, dad. um you showed the reality of how parents just have no idea where the pain is coming from. Donna turns on the faucet for bath, and the child freaks out. And I mean, how could you know what that trauma is that informed that reaction? And again, I just want to give you thank you for the honesty, because one of the things, as you know, about foster parenting is that most who try it drop out quickly. And you show that in the movie too, where the caseworker is calling, and so no, we can't do this. And it's a sibling set too, and so we really can't do this, right? And the Martins step in the end. But yeah, just thank you for being so honest, because part of the goal of this movie is that people will know that there are children who need them, and
Mhm.
that more people will rally around to foster and adopt, and to support those who foster and adopt as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think all of us, I know Lisa's fostered and adopted, and I still cry when I watch that scene where the church rallies around and gathers around them all, because I think we're all longing for people in our lives to understand what we're going through, to understand how difficult it is, and really to see, those close to us, especially in our communities of faith, to wrap around and provide just practical support. And the times that people have reached out to our family and said, "Hey, I know you're going through a lot. Here's a gift card. Go have a night out on me." Or, one family one time sent our family up to the mountains in Big Bear outside of LA and said, "Go have a weekend, in the mountains. Like, I appreciate you as a foster adoptive parent." And, that those things mean so much. And so not everyone, is called to foster or adopt. But if there's people in your life that are, like, reach out to them, support them. And I think that's what's happening when people watch the film. They're gaining an understanding for what families that are in the trenches are going through.
Well, I think it's dangerous. Often I think people think that, oh, Rebekah, oh, Lisa, oh, Kimberly, you're like saints, and we could never do what you're doing. You're such an exotic breed, right? And uh, no, actually, you're a human being just trying to answer the call to care for the orphan. And also, even if a certain person isn't called to adopt or foster, those things actually mean something. Bring over dinner on Thursday nights or whatever it is, because everybody feels overwhelmed. And I think especially if you're dealing with trauma in your house that you have no idea the origins of. Lisa, so we should say that you were one of the publicists for Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot, but you dragged me down to Atlanta, Georgia, and outside Atlanta, Georgia, in December a few years ago, because there was this movie that you just have a love for that was being put together. And so if you never got a dime to work on this
Right.
movie, you were marketing it even before you ever knew that you would be official. What is it about this movie that is so important, and what do you hope happens with it?
Yeah, I mean, it really has been like a perfect fusion of my professional life and my heart, because the, foster care and adoption, the modern orphan crisis in our culture has been really a soapbox, moment for me for a number of years. Kathryn, you and I have done panels together and lots of events in which, my big kind of turning point, especially for people of faith, is just that you can't be fully pro-life unless you're looking at the modern orphan crisis in our country. And so, especially as a Catholic, as a committed Catholic, to see how we really are lacking from a church perspective in being that wraparound support for people that are in our church communities, whether they're people like myself who are fostering children or have adopted children out of the foster care system, or even if within those communities there's families that are in crisis with children who are possibly susceptible to going into the foster care system. It's like, what are we doing as church to, really live out the fullness of the pro-life ethos? That's been the drum that I've been beating for a decade. And when Rebekah and I met a couple of years ago through a mutual friend, and she graciously trusted me with the script, when I read it, I was just really blown away because it really checked all the boxes for me. From a personal standpoint, as I read the pages of the script, I was like, this is my life. Like these are the emotions that I, as a mom to kids who struggle, I'm feeling this on a daily basis. I have thoughts where I say to myself, I don't want to parent the child anymore. Like, if I have those feelings where I feel like, did I make a mistake in allowing this, this makeup in our family life? And so I just felt the script was so honest. And at the same time, I was like, the message that this film gives is the answer to the orphan crisis in our country. They have basically given a roadmap to churches to how you can look beyond yourself and the things that you're doing as part of, the church life, and say, and again, as a Catholic, this is living out the corporal works of mercy. This is how we become the hands and feet of Christ. This is how we help the families in our community to solve, one of the worst crises that we have currently right now in our country. So it's been a joy and an honor to walk with them and see this movie finally coming to the big screen. It's an urgent call to anyone that's watching this to make sure that you let your church communities know about this film, get them into the theaters on July 4th, and share this with as many people as possible.
And I should also add, and I know Kimberly will agree, as someone who saw the movie recently, it's a beautiful movie. I hate to say it, sometimes so-called Christian movies, and I don't know that this is a Christian movie. This is a movie about Christians, but it's for everyone. And I hope that that's not lost in the Angel Studios distribution, right? This is a movie that anyone can be inspired by. It's a movie that Christians need to be inspired by and challenged by. But I wanted to say it's a beautiful movie. It's just objectively an excellent movie. And so I encourage people, if you're listening to this, perhaps because you're a Christian who's interested in foster care or pro-life or whatever brought you to this live or after the fact, invite somebody who's not necessarily a believer to go with you, because I think you'd have very interesting conversations. And Kimberly, tell me, so first of all, you're founder of Springs of Love, which is a ministry that helps, in particular, Catholic couples who have fostered, who are fostering, and have adopted. And I very much think that this movie, if you're a Catholic, this movie directly leads you to Springs of Hope for help on how you're part of the wraparound package, and even providing spiritual support. By the way, full disclosure, I'm on the board now of Springs of Love, but I'm on the board because I love the program, love the ministry, and that's why you asked me to join, and I'm very grateful for that. So what did you think of the movie, and why do you think it's important?
I loved the film so much, Rebekah. Thank you so much for writing this beautiful film. When I started watching it, of course, you're just brought right in. The cinematography is spectacular. All of it is like high level beauty, just absolute beauty. And as I was watching it in the beginning, I was like, ooh, they're making this seem too easy. Like everybody, they're like, I'm your mama, I'm your daddy, and I was like, oh, this is looking like it's going too easy. And I was getting a little concerned. And then, and then reality hits. They always talk about when you bring foster children into your home, there's usually a honeymoon period where things are going really smoothly. Not always, but there can be that. And then things get really hard because kids who have experienced trauma have like so much pain inside of them. And a lot of times, they're just trying to like learn to receive love, right? Like they've not been loved well. And so if they are suddenly, there's somebody just pouring into them, they might not be able to receive it. They don't trust it. They don't know if you're going to, are you going to be a reliable person who they can really open up to, or are you going to leave and dump them, And so there's a lot of fear in those children. So I just love this film because it's so realistic, just the challenges that families faced that they face when they foster. However, the shining light was that scene with the church all gathering together to support the families who were experiencing so much difficulty. And this is exactly like when I saw that film, I mean, of course I'm crying and I'm like, this is why we started Springs of Love, because so many families are telling me they feel like an island. They just feel like an island. And we felt like an island. I didn't know other people fostering, we got into it. We were going through infertility and we were, wanting to adopt. And that's kind of how we got into it. And then our eyes were open to the reality of the needs of the children. And then the beauty of the possibility of like reunification when that can happen. But when it can't, to be like a soft landing place for these children. And the fact that everybody has a role to play in this and helping these children to heal. I just went down the street and met with our local group home the other day and just realized, I mean, it was just heartbreaking. He's telling me, oh, we have a family that is getting ready to rupture their adoption. They adopted two little boys last year, 8 and 9, and their behaviors are getting to be too much for them. And they just said, we can't do this anymore. And they're just dumping the children off again. They're like, we have an 11-year-old and she's just in this group home because there is no home for her. She does not need therapeutic care. And she's stuck in this group home because there's no other place for her to go. So just finding out those stories in our own communities and then advocating for these children and getting the churches all involved and providing community. So, that's something at Springs of Love we're trying to do right now is create like a foster adoptive family parent curriculum so that they can come together and have a small group. And we have volunteers, they're forming a care team that'll come and provide meals and also work with the children and do some fun sensory kind of activities, emotional regulation things with the children. And that the parents are feeling fed and they're having that support in that community, which they so desperately need.
Yes.
I just want to say to those people who are watching live that you can put questions in the chat box and we'll integrate it into the conversation. Rebekah, you mentioned the trenches, and I think that was a crucial word because I do think like that families who foster and adopt are kind of like families in the military. Like the rest of the population doesn't understand, it's a relatively small community, and your movie helps us, the rest of us in, which I think is critical. And I remember Kimberly was talking about receiving love, and there's also that beautiful scene with Nino. The First Lady Donna's sister adopts Nino, and he is just like totally overwhelmed. Kimberly, this was probably one of the moments where you're thinking, oh, this is going to be too sugar-coated. but you watch him in that scene and all the people are coming up to him and saying, I'm your Aunt so-and-so, and I'm your Uncle so-and-so, and even Bishop Martin, I'm your Uncle Pastor Martin, and gives him a high five, and he looks overwhelmed at a moment, but it was like overwhelmed with love. Like, what do I do with this? Why do these people love me? And it's just so beautiful, but it also speaks in this beautiful way, but reading between the lines, this is part of the story, and the rougher version of that was when a girl was going to the Martin's house, a sibling set, and she says to the caseworker, are they really going to keep us? Do they really want us? And that's a real fear, because like you were saying, Kimberly, sometimes it gets too much. And there's that new book called Troubled by Rob Henderson. And he spent a lot of time in foster care, like 7 homes over 10 years, something like that. And you just see the constant, uncertainty, and you just kind of give up after a while, and don't have expectations. And even when he wound up getting into what seemed to be a stable home, it wasn't. And there was real cruelty that happened to him. But speaking of the military, he and I think this is important in considering the whole foster, the possibility of fostering and adopting too. He talks later in the book about, he doesn't talk in religious terms, but I think the Holy Spirit, provided for him and protected him, because there's no reason he shouldn't have gotten addicted to fentanyl or, whatever opioid, but he always said no to those things. And friends of his who he went to school with wound up dead, and he knows he could have wound up dead. He doesn't make a religious conclusion, but he does note that there were a couple of people, mostly men here and there, who watched out for him, and one of them suggested the military. And he talks about how sometimes freedom is giving up your freedom, because this needs to be done. In his case, he knew he needed some discipline. He knew he needed some things that had not been provided in his youth. And I think likewise, with fostering and adopting, there is a giving up of freedom. If you're an empty nester, you could have traveled the world, but maybe you take in a teenager instead, who is likely to, age out of the system and get himself arrested or whatever it is. And so there's something very timely about this. And I do think too, we keep speaking to the reality of it, but also just to understand that there are practicalities here, and I think the practicalities come through in the movie too. I'm really grateful, you didn't create a movie that was just inspiring, and it is inspiring. But Lisa, what do you want to see people do with this movie? Because I know that's very much on all of our hearts.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking as you're talking through so many things, like the military reference and things. I think so often people see foster and adoptive parents, like you said earlier, like they're on this pedestal, like, oh my gosh, these are special elite forces. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's actually the opposite. I think, like, as we simply say yes to the Lord and we follow his leading, and he's called us to care for the orphans and called us to defend the fatherless and to protect the vulnerable and all these things. But as we say yes and we step in and follow him, I think we find him, where it talks about, when we give up our lives is where we actually find it. And you become equipped. Like, he calls us in our weakness, and we step in and we find out, oh Lord, we need people. We need you. Like, I've never felt so weak in my whole life when I stepped in. Everyone wanted to put me on a pedestal and say, oh, you guys are amazing. But the truth is, if there's foster adoptive parents in your life, they feel weak, they feel vulnerable, they feel they need you. And there's a good process in that. And we address that in the film, where it's like his power is made perfect in weakness. So I'll boast in my weakness so that Christ's power will rest on me. And you don't really have that power until you come to a point of weakness and feeling like I am weak and he is strong and I need him and I need the body to wrap around me. And so I would just encourage people too. Sometimes foster care and adoption is like scary and, oh, it's for the elite people and I can't do it. And I'm not saying everyone is called to it, but I know that, there's a lot of us, that are called to it, and we all have a part to play. So our hope is that it incites a movement. It, motivates people to action, that you watch this. I mean, I don't think you can watch it and look away. I mean, to me, it's kind of like driving past an accident and you see children at the side of the road and their parents are dead inside and they're walking into this traffic. I mean, anybody who sees that would pull over, stop and say, it's time. I got to help. I got to help these kids. And that's what's happening all over this nation right now. There are children in our communities that desperately need people of faith to step forward and say, enough's enough. I'm going to care for these kids. And I'm not going to look and see, what is it going to do to my life? How's it going to affect my kids? How's it going to affect my family? I'm going to, because I have the heart of God and this is his heart, I'm going to step in and I'm going to act and I'm going to do something about it. And that's what we want to see happen all over this nation. We think that this film has the ability, through the power of the Holy Spirit, to move the needle and to ignite the movement and really reverse the foster crisis in America. I mean, that's our goal. I know it's a huge goal, and without God, it's not possible, but we feel like with God it's possible.
Well, I also love, I feel like there's a huge ecumenical nature to this movie, because yes, it's a Baptist church, but three of us are Catholic here, and love this movie so much. And one of the things I just submitted a column writing about this. This movie is about being a better Christian. It's not just being a movie about foster care and adoption. And there's something about, and I do think it's the Holy Spirit, in this church, providing a witness, that really challenges every Christian, and every person of faith. What more can we do? And this movie also isn't a pro-life movie, but pro-lifers need to make an examination of conscience about, what more, where do I have a role in this? And I don't foster or adopt. I say with all credibility, not everyone is called to it. But on the other hand, I was listening to someone recently who said, it involves making a choice. Just make a choice. Obviously discern carefully and be prudent and all these important things. But sometimes it can be a cop-out to say, I'm not called to it, consider that too, I think, just in the examination of conscience. Lisa, I know that you really want I know we've talked about this many times over the years, just how can we light a fire under the Catholic community? Because there is an element where evangelicals in particular, and we've had this conversation before, do better at this. Catholics were in the forefront with nuns and orphanages once upon a time, but not anymore. And too often in a Catholic parish, you might give money to the bishop's appeal and you just assume all the problems are being taken care of by departments, but departments can't love children, right? And that's where families really come into play. And also the Catholic parish kind of model doesn't necessarily encourage, and at all times, finding out what the needs of the community are. And that's what the church in Possum Trot did. They found out that there were these kids. You can't unknow that. and then they stepped up to be Christ to those children, to provide fathers and mothers. And I met on the set one of the women who was single, who adopted, and she wasn't like promoting single motherhood. She was saying, like, I've got a community around me, I can do this too. And I do just have to say about the people of Bennett Chapel, oh my goodness, like the real people. I was blessed to be on the set when one of the days when they were there as extras in a scene or some scenes. And I mean, Salt of the Earth does not do this. I wanted to like move to Possum Trot, and I don't like the weather in Texas. So, but so Lisa, what is our grand strategy for making sure Catholics hear this rallying cry in a serious way?
Yeah, I mean, I for the Catholics that are listening, to this, and that'll see this when it's, released out there, this particular conversation, go see this movie. I mean, that to me, like right now, we have a tool, because it's about awareness. I think the thing that has been so frustrating for me over the years is that in our dioceses, in our parishes, we don't have an awareness of exactly what's happening in the foster and adoption community. We don't have the awareness that 400,000 children right now are legally free for adoption in our country. We don't understand the level of seriousness that this as a modern day orphan crisis really is. We're not talking about it. Our priests aren't talking about it from the pulpit. Our pro-life communities are not having this as a part of a whole life program in our churches. And I think it all boils down to awareness, because when people started to meet my family and come to know my family, and our journey from infertility to foster care to adoption, and then how that changed our hearts and our minds, a lot of the feedback that I received was, I never knew this. I never knew this was happening in our country. Why aren't we talking about this more in our churches? Why don't I ever hear this from a priest on Sunday from the pulpit? Why doesn't my parish offer a ministry where, just like we do on the pro-life side of things, where we're, collecting, baby bottles and, diapers and all of the things for, maternity care on the pro-life side to help women who find themselves in unplanned pregnancies. Why aren't we doing the same for our foster families? Why aren't we doing the same to service the agencies in our local community to make sure that they have the resources there? Why aren't we offering mentoring for families that have teenage children who need, support for tutoring, or, just good examples of fathers, other fathers, men and women. Like, we're just not doing this as church. And this film, I feel like, if we can get this before the eyes of our community, our church community, it's going to help to raise awareness, just like with Sound of Freedom. I mean, it's no coincidence that, Sound of Freedom came out, on July 4th last year, and now we have this film that's coming out on July 4th this year. And there's a connection between the two, and that was a big awareness moment for the church and the faith communities around the world, what's happening with human trafficking. And, one of the statistics here is that, foster children, particularly children who have aged out of the foster care system, are one of the largest trafficked communities in our country. And so this is an answer to that. This is a way for us as people of faith to step up, respond to the call that we've been given, biblically, to respond in this way, and put an end to one of the worst tragedies that we have in our country right now. So, I think this film is the way. And that's not just because I'm the publicist or one of the publicists on
No,
it.
I
It's
can
because
testify before you were a publicist.
Yeah,
You're all on board.
She's been involved since we weren't paying her and didn't even know if we were going to be able to ever.
Right.
So, yes.
Well, and part of, as Rebekah mentioned earlier, this is a tragedy crisis that doesn't need to be, because you don't need every person in every church to step up to the plate. You need one family, two families, you know, and we could solve this problem. Rebekah, are there, besides the gathering around other families who were struggling, do you have any other favorite scenes in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think the scene that my husband's in, so my husband's the director and we wrote and produced together, and there's a scene where he plays a megachurch pastor whose priorities are not in the right place. And to be honest, we went back and forth with that. We got feedback. A lot of the faith-based distributors were very nervous about this scene because they felt like we were going to alienate our core audience and offend the churches. And, we're not making movies to pat people on the back and make them feel good. I mean, we're making movies, truly art. Like, if you really make art, it should be shaping culture. It should be changing culture. It should be, not just saying what we want to hear. And so in this scene, we fought to keep it because we felt like it was important to really show, that not, as different churches, we don't all have our priorities in the right place. Kind of like what we're talking about is that, clearly throughout scripture, you see that, Jesus cared for the children, his church, we're called to care for the vulnerable and the orphan and all of true religion is to care for the orphan and widow. And I've actually worked with a lot of churches because I worked in child welfare, getting churches involved, and it shouldn't be as hard as it is to really get the churches in the trenches caring for vulnerable kids and families. I felt like I had to convince them. And so, this particular scene kind of holds up a little bit of a mirror. But, we're having pastors leave screenings. We had one pastor, first screening we ever did, and we were still kind of on the fence, like, Lord, do we keep this scene in here? Or is this our offense? Like, is this your heart? And we had a pastor leave a screening who said, he's like, I want to meet with you, met with us for dinner the next day. And he could hardly talk. A day later, he had a lump in his throat. And he said, I'm like that Pastor Mark. And he said, my church is like Pastor Mark's church. And he said, we need to change. He said, thank you for being honest and challenging us and holding us accountable, because there's churches all over and we need to hear this message. And so, it's bringing, we think it has the ability to bring change because if it's not done in a heavy-handed way, it's done, in a creative way that's entertaining, but it's a powerful scene, and I think it's important.
Like many things, politics and media, sorry, guilty part of the media, but have made this issue so much worse than it needs to be in terms of people even beginning to think about it or wanting to think about it. And one of the reasons that I got involved in talking more and working more in foster care and adoption was because I realized that pro-life people didn't, including myself, didn't really know much about where to send people, how to go about anything. And even well-intentioned saintly people at pregnancy care centers kind of don't even want to go there because often they want to convince the mom that she can be a mom. And so the idea of choosing adoption is not not really on the radar often. Then of course there are just so many issues. You want to reunify, but sometimes you just can't reunify. And there are a whole bunch of folks in child welfare who kind of reunification or family, a family reunification in some way or another, kinship care is the word I was looking for, at all costs, even if, you know, the child has no relationship with there's so many elements, but usually the only time adoption and foster care wind up in the news is when there was some horrific story, or we're having a debate about same-sex marriage, or and there's a whole world of foster care and adoption beyond those two issues. And I think this is another reason that this movie is so powerful, because we have an excuse to talk about these issues, and it's not the outliers, it's not the political, it's not the ideological. This is just about humanity and loving on people. And Lisa's heard me say this before. I spend a lot of time with the Sisters of Life, Catholic nuns who care for women who need help, who are pregnant and need help, or who are mothers and need help. And I've learned from them how many people have never had a birthday celebrated for them. And like when I was looking at little Nino or any of the other children in the movie, I wondered, did they ever, you know, did those kids in reality ever have a birthday celebrated for them before they got to Possum Trot? You know, it's a reality. And when you know that kind of thing, it's, as many have said here, it's hard to unknow that. I'm going to take rope in a couple of questions in a moment. Kimberly, you were talking just in the so-called green room about, before we went live, about how, you know, you were trying to get your local small town movie theater to show the movie. And whether or not you succeed in that, you plan on having some discussions about the movie.
Yeah.
What are your recommendations to people?
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy. I called the local foster care agencies. There's a group home, there's the, you know, local county foster care agency. I just called these people and said, hey, could we do a big follow-up event after the movie talking about the Possum Trot kids in our town? Because there are so many children, and, you know, statistics don't change people's hearts. You know, we say 400,000 children in foster care. That seems so daunting and overwhelming. Like, what can I do? That's too much. And you just check out. But if you say, you know what, there's a little 8-year-old and 9-year-old little sibling, these two little boys, they need a family. They need a family now. And you know what? God is calling one of you guys to step up and take care of these children. There's a little 11-year-old girl, you know, she needs a family. She's a delightful child, you know, she enjoys, you know, horseback riding, or, you know, like finding out about like the child themselves and their interests. Like, these are real flesh and blood human beings. And so often we can just look at them as their problems. You know, yeah, this child was molested by her father, by her grandfather. I mean, and you think, oh my gosh, I don't, you know, that's too hard for me. I can't deal with that. And so people just check out. And I think if we can start hearing these stories, meeting these children, I think video stories are so important. Hearing the stories, seeing the children, you know, this film is unbelievably helpful in, like, I think moving people's hearts to seeing like this 12-year-old girl in the film that you think she was like the hardest child. They're like, oh, you don't want her. Because I remember when my husband and I first started fostering, I would say, could you, sure, it took a long time for them to call us. And I said, surely you have a child. And they told me, oh, you don't want any of the kids that we have right now. And it was just so heartbreaking. I was like, you know, just like, let's humanize these children. I mean, my goodness. And I just actually ran into a neighbor today who had been thinking about fostering, and then I encouraged him and whatever. And he took in an 11-year-old girl, and he just said she could only last 3 months here. She had to be institutionalized. We couldn't handle her. And I was just like, I was so heartbroken, because I'm thinking, if, you know, had he been educated enough, had he been in, you know, did he have a support system? If he had seen this film, I think he would have realized the challenges of trying to raise and take in a child who has had so much hurt, so much pain, that it's going to take a long time. And I love in this film because it says, 1 year later, you're like, oh my goodness, like you're watching the trajectory. Like it takes years sometimes for these children to begin to open their hearts to you. And so you'll see a lot of behaviors, but you don't just shut that child off. And my favorite line in the whole movie, I wrote it down, is when the mom is talking to this 12-year-old girl and she says to her, "You're a gift. You were only ever meant to be loved." And if we can begin to see the children that way, if we can begin to see each of these children as a gift, like this is what the Christian community can bring to these children, their little hearts. Like Jesus is who's going to heal their hearts. You know, they need to be loved. They need to experience what unconditional love is. You know, we have to expect they're going to have behaviors. We have to expect that. It's not easy. But if we come together in a community and support one another, I feel like, you know, we can start to like, you know, walk together and day by day help these children to heal, help them to find friends and community and love and support beyond just our family, right? And so, yeah, that's what so we're hoping to do something in this community, and I'm hoping that I mean, I just want to encourage other people to just call your local foster care agencies, call your local group homes and say, hey, let's do a follow-up event. It's not a big deal. Just, you know, book a room and advertise it, put it on the radio stations and put flyers up and have them come and tell the stories of the kids that are right there that need a home.
Well, once again, I want to say something, you know, we're all obsessed or supposed to be obsessed with like presidential election and things like that right now, but the power that you have is on the ground right where you are. And you know, no one's going to fix the presidential election, but you can do like Kimberly and Lisa and Rebekah do in your own community. And it's like the best of civil society. This is, you know, this is how we really support one another and create virtuous communities and so I can't recommend this movie enough. One of our live audience members asks, and this would be for Rebekah, was there one child's story that stuck out in the Possum Trot community to you that you decided to highlight?
Yeah, we did. And it was actually the Terry character that we highlighted throughout because, you know, telling a story about 22 families and 77 kids and a whole church. And, you know, we had to find, you know, who do we focus on? And we ended up focusing on the pastor and his wife and their children. But one in particular, Terry, was an older youth that they adopted she was around 12 when they adopted her. And she had a lot of trauma, and she'd spent so much time with her cat that she acted like a cat when she first came to their house. But you know, there's such a beautiful story of redemption, even through the telling of her story. She watched the film the other night for the first time, and she cried, and she actually called her mom, First Lady Donna Martin. She actually was the only one who had never officially been adopted. It was a long-term foster situation. She's always been part of the family, but she was an older youth who didn't really want to be adopted. And after watching the film, she called her mom crying and said, I want to be adopted. And she's in her 30s now, and we're gonna formally, you know, help initiate the process for her to be formally adopted into the Martin family. So, you know, even through the film now, we're getting to see God bring reconciliation and healing, and that is our prayer, you know, throughout. And Kimberly, I love what you said about these children being a gift, because, you know, I love, and I'm so pro-life, and I honor the Catholic Church and how much you fought for life, and it's just so beautiful. But if we are gonna be pro-life, and we have to believe that these kids' lives have value, that they have meaning, that they have purpose, and that we believe in them, and we show that we believe in them, and we have hope for them by giving up our lives for them and caring for them. And, you know, as much as we all prayed for the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and the Dobbs decision was just miraculous, you know, to see that in our lifetime. But what a testimony to the world to say, we're not just going to stand up and say, you know, we're against abortion. but these kids that are coming into the foster system that are unwanted and aren't being cared for, we're going to care for them, and we're going to step forward and make sure that we show the world how pro-life we really are.
And it's important to note that there are more couples than babies when it comes to adopting babies. Everyone likes an adorable baby, but it's much harder with those older children. And Kimberly, you reminded me of a couple instances I'm aware of where maybe an diocese tries to set something up, um, a foster care adoption program, and they thought that it would be a no-brainer for like the parish with the big homeschooling families and lots of children, right? No, because there was this fear that the foster child would somehow poison the other children. First of all, you never know what your child is going to turn up like.
Mhm.
But that's some of the fear that we need to work on. And part of the way you work on it is that wraparound support, that you all have worked on in your experiences in child welfare, both as families and advocates. One man writes, "My wife and I are an older couple who weren't able to have children. And really, because of my passivity, we never explored adoption or foster care. We're in our late 50s now. What are the qualifications and costs for a couple like us to help in some way?" And I think in some ways there are mentorship opportunities, but I also remember the Philadelphia foster care case that was at the Supreme Court, where the main plaintiff was an elderly woman who basically was single-handedly saving Black boys in Philadelphia. Just such a beautiful witness. Does anybody have any? Yeah, Kimberly.
I can speak to that. So yes, there are no age requirements, and there's no cost involved with fostering. So I would encourage you to consider trying to be a respite provider. That would be a way to just kind of get into the system. And then you're there for emergency or short-term placements, and you can kind of see how it goes. And maybe you will be interested and able to provide a home for an older child. That would be amazing. I mean, you're at a great age to bring in, an older child. And there are children, for example, who have experienced a lot of trauma, who are really don't do well in a home with other children. And that would be an ideal place for them to go, is to have a couple where they could just be kind of maybe the only child in the home. So there are definitely options for you. So don't discount it.
Well, I can't believe this, but we're about to run out of time. And I know everyone's busy, people joining in and people on this discussion. Just last words from anybody, from each of you, about the importance of this movie, about creative ways to make use of this movie. Yeah. Do you want to start, Lisa?
Sure. I think, for us, I think our goal is really for faith communities to take on the film as a tool for awareness. And that means, within either the parish itself or even at a diocesan level, I'll use the example of Archbishop Naumann of Kansas City, who's just such a crusader for women and children in general. He provided an incredible endorsement for this film, and his diocese is stepping up as a diocese to encourage people to see this movie with all of the Catholic churches throughout the whole diocese. And that's the example. The example is, you have this perfect tool for education and awareness on this issue that doesn't sugarcoat what it means, not only to be a foster family who's, steps up to, be that family for a child, but also what the experiences are for the children themselves. And so having just the whole picture, packaged in this film, I think is a gift for any church. And so, for those of you that are watching live today, will watch this later, please consider picking up the phone, contacting the decision makers in your churches, contacting the decision makers at your dioceses, or if you run into roadblocks there, join together with, other, even from a pro-life perspective, other pro-life people in your community, and take the time to buy out a theater, in your area, and invite people to come to this film. It's as simple as that.
Kimberly?
Yeah, I definitely I second that and say to try to really get the church, get your churches going and seeing this film and using it as a springboard. So, what I'm hoping is that, after the film comes to our community, we have an event like a week later. And I think that is what we need to be doing, is bringing in local speakers. Contact your local foster care agency. It's not that hard. And say, do you have any speakers who might be available? Like, are there any children who've aged out of the system who would be willing to speak? Are there any foster families who've had a lot of success who would like to speak? Just invite them. It's really low-hanging fruit. It's not that hard to do, and you can have a huge impact by it. We have a bunch of resources on our website, springsoflove.org, to be able to do these kind of events too. So yeah, if there's anything I could do to help, contact me. But I think just it's not as hard as it might seem to be. But to put on an awareness event at your church, and to be able to watch this film, I think could really, really push the needle. They say like 30% of Christians have considered fostering and only like 2% actually do. So, this could actually really profoundly move that needle if we are just showing this film and talking about it.
And before I let Rebekah give the final word here, this should be a meeting ground too. We've all been hard on Christians right now, because that's what Christians do. We're sinners and we're aware of that. And but this should be common ground. If you can put away the controversial issues, that I mentioned before, if you're not inclined, or you don't even go to church to sell out a theater, just invite a friend and have a conversation about this. But Kimberly, you mentioning calling the local government agencies and group homes, and why can't you have a conversation about foster care that is not an insular group? And also, the fact of the matter is, why I mentioned we're being hard on Christians here. The flip side, yes, few people, relatively speaking, are stepping up to the plate, right? But then you have these amazing stories like Possum Trot. And, I love what you say about local speakers. You've got a great video series on the Springs of Love YouTube page where couples just tell their story about their journey, or hearing that, you start to realize, Lisa and I have known each other for more years than we care to remember. But at some point, and I had experience of her as a publicist, and then all of a sudden I find out the most important thing she does I didn't know about, and how many transactional relationships like that do we have? With that, Rebekah, your heart must be so overwhelmed. And
oh, I'm so excited though. I feel like I've been in labor for 8 years, getting ready to birth a baby. So it's like, but I'll just say, to the audience, and, thank you guys for one. Kathryn, thank you for putting this together, and just, you know, being such a champion for the film. But, you know, there's so many films and television, you know, shows in Hollywood that honestly, we don't let our kids watch. We hardly go to the movies anymore. So, you know, to have a story that, you know, we're talking about a lot of the hard things, but there's actually, you know, funny scenes, the whole audience is laughing, there's joy. I mean, it uplifts family, it shows the beauty of marriage, and, you know, marriage is doing great things together and how it brings them together as a couple. Shows the value of family and how family brings healing, and its pro-life message. I mean, it's the kind of movies that we all want to see made. And I would just say, from the filmmakers who worked for 8 years to protect this story and to fight for this story and to fight for the integrity of the message, to have a powerful film that can shape culture. You know, it's not perfect, but I would love for you guys to go and bring your churches and your family and friends. It's testing really well with people that don't have faith. I mean, we're in some of the early screenings that we're doing, people that don't have any faith are saying, if church was like that, I would go to church, you know. So it's showing what's possible through the power of church and faith. So thank you for having me on today, and I hope everybody goes out on opening weekend. And it's going to be a wide release in 2,000 theaters, so you can go to angel.com/hope. And I guess some theaters are already selling out, so get your tickets and go on opening weekend.
Yeah, I've watched it many times on my computer, but I really want to see it on the big screen, and I would just want to support it. I think it's important to support it, and I'm so glad you'll be able to finish the labor.
Bring all the sisters of life, Kathryn.
Yes.
Have the sisters of life go have a group outing with the sisters.
Have a full theater of sisters. Thank you so much. Kimberly Henkel, founder of Springs of Love, Lisa Wheeler, founder of Carmel Communications, and Rebekah Weigel, writer and producer of this beautiful movie, Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot. Thank you so much for this contribution you've made. It's so beautiful. It's so powerful. And if you're listening to this live, this is going to be on the National Review Institute's YouTube page shortly. Please share it with people who weren't able to join us live, and in promoting both the movie and this important issue. Thank you so much on behalf of the National Review Institute, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.